Let's take a look at the fundamentals of what constitutes fiction. Because fiction is of great importance to human beings. Sometimes, whether we realize it or not, we deal with fiction on an almost daily basis. It could be in the form of a casual lie that you tell somebody. It could be in the narrative of a dream that you had and you're discussing it with your friends or family and so on. It could be in the memories that you form. Sometimes, as memories seem better or worse than the actual incident. And your interpretation or your memory of the memory could be called fiction. So I think it is quite important that we have a fundamental understanding of what the world generally perceives to be fiction. Let's take a look at the genres of literature. You have prose, then verse, which is poetry, drama, which are basically plays. But because this is literature, basically the arts, we should understand that there are no absolutes or watertight compartments. And that is the beauty of art. It teaches us not to be rigid in our perceptions. So you have, prose that reads like poetry, or that might even bring in poetry in the middle of its narration. You have poems that might have long, lines and read like prose. You might have poems that are structured in the form of a play, that is a conversation between characters. You could have plays that are structured like poems or that read like a novel. So this experimentation not just brings freshness to these genres, they also help human beings understand that this variety is what makes life beautiful and worth living. Now, as far as prose is concerned, there are a number of subsegments, one of which is fiction, and that is our main topic of discussion for today. So we'll come to that a little later. You have non-fiction, which is the diametric opposite of fiction. See, while fiction is a form of writing that relies heavily on the imaginative and creative capacities of the author, non-fiction, on the other hand, relies upon the ability of the author to speak the truth and nothing but the truth. Okay, so that's why non-fiction has under it segments such as autobiographies, essays, it could be books on travel writing, it could be books on history. All of this forms part of non-fiction. So if fiction and non-fiction are to be distinguished, I would say that the element of veracity or truth in non-fiction is what sets it apart from fiction. Okay, if a writer of non-fiction, for example, a man is writing his autobiography, okay, and into that he puts in matters that are not true, then that cannot be called fiction as non-fiction. It can only be called fiction. Okay, so it is very, very important for a writer of non-fiction to be truthful, and not just be truthful, be impartially truthful. It is not sufficient to just write about your truth. It is important to write about truth which is impartial, which incorporates arguments from all sides. See, that is very important, and that is one of the elements that are missing in many of our histories. Okay, sometimes history tends to be one-sided. So that cannot be allowed. It has to be an inclusive history. So that is what sets apart fiction from non-fiction. The element of veracity or truth that non-fiction has to adhere to. Imagine a newspaper report. Okay, we rely upon newspapers to give us the truth, the facts. And if newspapers start making wild accusations and printing improbable things, how can we trust it? That's why a newspaper is nonfiction. Now, again, like I said, there needn't be any absolutes. Why can't we enjoy a bit of fiction with our non-fiction is why we have blended, forms of writing which are called romana clef, okay, or a novel with a key. It's a French term. So a roman à clef is a novel about a fictional situation with real life characters. Okay, for example, you have George Orwell's Animal Farm, which talks, about communist Russia, okay, where Trotsky had been hunted down, and how a beautiful participative ideology was completely turned on its head through power politics. Okay, so it through the allegory of animals, what we see is that the true nature of power is revealed, and how absolute power can corrupt absolutely. But the thing with Romana Clef is that in order to fully appreciate the novel, you must know the real life personages, the real life situations that inspired it. So the novel will make sense otherwise also. See, if you don't know anything about Russia or anything about the situation with Leon Trotsky, it will not matter. Okay, but the novel will make total sense. It will hit hard only when you know the hidden historical content. Okay, that's when it starts having that significance. Now, for example, take the Malayalam movie Left, Right, Left. Okay, it could be enjoyed as a movie, but at the same time, when you look for clues as to which character is representing which political, let's say, ideology or aspect, or which real life politician, then the movie becomes that much more interesting. Okay. Now we come to the main topic under discussion, which is fiction. Now, as I told you before, if non-fiction relies upon the duty of the author to speak the truth and nothing but the truth, fiction is a genre of literature that relies on creativity on the part of the author. Okay, so there is a great deal of imagination that goes into creating the situations, the characters, the plot, the settings, and so on. Okay, so the main feature of fiction is imagination. And without imagination, fiction will not appeal. Okay, so even when you plant a boy and a girl who are in college, rich girl, poor boy, or poor girl, rich boy, as the case may be, and they fall in love, there is problem, and then of course everything becomes okay. This, though it involves imagination, it will not appeal anymore because it has been done to death. Okay, there has been a lot of work that has been repetitive in this aspect. Okay, so what I'm saying is that while imagination is what characterizes fiction, there is also a degree of experimentation, a leap that people take. Okay, for example, you have books like Harry Potter. Okay, look at the scope of imagination that has gone into making it, into writing it, into conceptualizing it. Okay, you have books like The Lord of the Rings, that entire series. Okay, and in fact, for that, J.R.R. Tolkien, the author, even invented a language, and it was not just random language. It was actually a language with grammar, syntax, and guidebook that also told you how to pronounce these words. So if you have learned, it's possible to have learnt this particular language that is spoken in the Lord of the Rings, Elven, and so on. Okay, so yeah, and another thing is that, as I told you, the fictionality of fiction is what sets it apart from non-fiction. So while non-fiction has to be truthful, it has to be inclusive, it has to be impartial, fiction, on the other hand, can be one-sided. It does not matter. Okay, and see, for example, if there are fictional elements in autobiographies, as I told you before, it could be considered as a fictionalized autobiography. Now, sometimes, the person is long gone, he's dead a long time, so somebody decides to write their biography. Now, because the central subject of the biography is no longer alive, it can only be fiction. It's called a fictionalized autobiography, or a fictionalized biography. I'm sorry. In this case, it is a fictionalized biography. Okay, so if I decide to write the biography of, let's say, Indira Gandhi, it will not be an authorized biography, it will be a fictionalized biography. Okay, and suppose I want to write the life story of a painter who never existed. Okay, not only will that be, let's say, a piece of fiction, but because it has the characteristics of a biography, it will be called a creative biography. So, the very names like fictionalized autobiography, fictionalized biography, creative biography gives you valuable clues as to, how the fictional and the non-fictional have interacted with each other in order to produce these works. Now, as I told you earlier, some works are purely fictional, but they will be claimed to be inspired by true events. Okay, they could be fictionalized life stories, imagined histories, they could be imagined scientific experiments, and so on. Okay, so fiction, as I have told you before, is not obliged to be faithful to the truth unless it involves certain you know elements that demand faithfulness. Okay, so as I have mentioned in the example here, a writer of fiction cannot claim that the Second World War was fought in Antarctica, but he can write a novel where the Third World War is fought in Antarctica. See, so there are limits even within fiction, or else the author can create a parallel universe where the Second World War was fought in Antarctica. So it's very, very important to keep an open mind while reading fiction because it is a very vibrant genre. And as far as fiction is concerned, it is further divided into a number of categories: the novel, the novella, short story, flash fiction, microfiction, and so on. Okay, and novel, as you know, is a relatively longer story. It has very defined plots, characters, themes, settings, and it is considerable in length. It could be at least about 200, if not more, pages. See, that is what we generally call a novel. Okay, and there would be considerable amount of craft that is devoted to the setting, the background, the character descriptions, and so on. I'm sure all of you would have read at least one novel in your life, so you know what I'm talking about. Now, novella, on the other hand, is shorter than a novel, but longer than a short story. Okay, so it's that in between space. It could be about 50 to 100 pages, and it won't be as elaborate as the novel. It makes for very easy reading. It's a short read, but at the same time, it takes up more of your time than the short story. Now, the short story, on the other hand, is one of the most popular, let's say, genres of fiction in the world today. It's because of its length. A short story is short, obviously, and it makes for a quick read. And in these days when we are extremely busy, it's a good thing. Now, there will be a video that will be coming up on the short story, so we will discuss it in detail there. I will move on to flash fiction. Now, flash fiction is the in thing now. Their stories are not more than 300, at the most 500 words, and they just carry the kernel of the story that's just told to you with very little description. So you see that the various kinds of fiction differ from each other in terms of their length, in terms of their character, plot, theme, and setting, the way these are developed. Okay, now microfiction is very, very interesting. It might just be a sentence at the most two. You have these terribly tiny tales that are doing the rounds on Facebook and so on. I'm sure you might have seen them. One of my favorite examples of microfiction is, it's called the shortest horror story in the world. It goes like this: the last man on earth was preparing to go to sleep when he heard a knock on his door. That's the end of the story. Okay, so the significance and what all of this means is left to the reader to imagine. Now, as I told you before, fiction is a very flexible genre. It can have as its theme literally anything in the world. You have seen it for yourself. There are wizards that have formed the theme of fiction. You have elves, you have orcs, you have courtesans, you have Mughal rulers, you have machines that are the protagonists in fiction. Literally anything in the world. Okay. And fiction is very, very contemporary because the fiction of a time will represent the immediate concerns of the society and the world at that given point of time. Okay, so for example, today, because human beings are so concerned about the advancement of science and technology and how far it has encroached into our worlds, that you have fiction being written about artificial intelligence that takes over this entire world. Our integration with machines have become so much so that we feel that we might just evolve into a form that is not entirely human. Okay, and we might be half man, half machine kind of a thing. So there are stories or works of fiction about that. Then of course, pandemics have always been something of a fascination for human beings. So a number of popular works deal with the outbreak of a zombie epidemic, and people turn into zombies, and they go about biting and converting other people into zombies. So these works have become very, very popular. Okay, so, fiction of a particular time will reflect the immediate concerns of society and the world at that given point of time. Okay, so you have number of works, as I told you, that have been written in the genre of fiction. You have stories about ordinary human beings. This is very interesting novel with the title "The 100-Year-Old Man Stepped Out of the Window and Disappeared." And that is exactly what happens in that book also. Okay, you have stories that novels that anthropomorphize animals. Okay, you have stories about historical periods. You have stories about basically anything that you can imagine. That must have been a story about it, because after all, it's imagination, and anybody can imagine anything in this world. So here I have some examples for you of the various kinds of fiction. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list. There are more works that are there, which will give you a wider idea of what fiction constitutes. So you have science fiction in the form of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. You have Star Wars, which spawned an entire movie franchise. Again, it talks about intergalactic travel and so on. And another fascination that human beings have in terms of time machines, time travel. You have books like The Time Traveler's Wife. You have this book, of course, A Time Machine. And now there's a lot of work that is coming out about parallel universes being possible. Okay, that there is more to this world than what meets the eye. So these works are very interesting in that aspect. Then this whole idea of a dystopian world, where probably because of a nuclear explosion, the entire world has gone up in smoke, and now there is a small band of survivors that are traveling to a central point in order to escape the ravages that have been caused around them. You have movies of that sort also, like The Bird Box, and so on. So The Handmaid's Tale is one such example. Then you have Gun Island by Amitav Ghosh. It's a very new book, and that talks about the impact that climate change can make on our lives. So, again, see how contemporary this work is and how significant it is for our times. So, look at that connection also. Now, you also have fiction that is written for young people. You have the Hunger Games. Not only is it fiction for young people, it is also dystopian, because again, that talks about how people are exploited by capitalist societies for their pleasure. So it's a very layered and nuanced kind of a conversation that the Hunger Games has. Now, earlier I was telling you about historical fiction, and here you have Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, that is supposed to be one of the best pieces of historical fiction to have come out in recent times. It is deeply allegorical also, because it is a reflection of how power works its way around the world today. And this book won the Booker Prize last year, as you can see for yourself. Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other, which talks about the concerns that, Black people have in the world today, and how those concerns are slightly different from the concerns of their predecessors. Other Black writers like Alice Munro and Toni Morrison and so on. So this book is quite significant because it's also very contemporary. It tells you about how the world today has been integrated into fiction, and this is what keeps fiction very, very dynamic, very, very alive. And of course, Fault in the Stars is an example of young adult fiction, which is a major genre now because people want to write for young people. They have recognized the reading potential of young people, so they write fiction that have teenagers as their protagonists, or young adults as their protagonists, not beyond the age of 30, definitely not, and what their concerns are, and how they deal with or approach problems that are very dear to them, that are personal to them, and things that young people can identify with. So we see that, where, once upon a time fiction was just about women and, their problems, or wars, battles and bravery and political intrigue and so on. Today, fiction has branched off into incorporating as many human as well as non-human experiences within itself. And this is why I would say that fiction is a very dynamic genre, okay? Because it never rests. It always seeks newer innovations. It seeks newer ideas. It brings in a greater variety and integrates a number of different elements, cultural, social, political, pop, okay? All of these things are integrated into making fiction. And always remember, the fiction of a time is characteristic of its society as well as the world around it. So fiction is also sensitive to these things. Thank you very much.